Hello everyone, Sternguard here. Today we continue our series of advanced guides, especially focusing on gunpowder factions because they are the manliest and the ones that I am personally more comfortable with. Today we're talking about Kislev, and specifically we are joined by a very esteemed guest. Can you please introduce yourself, BoB that Builder?
Hey everybody, my name is Bob Dat Builder. I make maps and I like shooting stuff with gunpowder. So that's pretty much the only qualifications I have here, but love me some Kislev.
Excellent. That is a passion I share quite a lot. And can you please tell us something about Kislev as someone who is just approaching, this game from a more competitive standpoint that might want to entice him to learn a bit more about Kislev. What is Kislev about? What are the strengths and weaknesses, sort of as an introduction to the faction?
So first thing with Kislev is they are a strong, balanced faction, and you typically are going to want to play them if you want to play a faction that has a really solid, balanced identity, where you're going to be using your range tools along with your cavalry, along with your chariots, basically to have a really solid back and forth with your unit interaction. Unlike a faction like Greenskins, where it's all smash the units, run them together, Kislev is very much so about you got to get your positioning correct. You have to play them in a way where it's really almost a game of chess the entire time. Kind of going back and forth, making it so that your opponent doesn't have the ability to encircle you. It's a very fun faction to play if you're looking at it from both a tactics perspective and trying to better your micro, because you can get some very satisfying cav charges off.
So,
Their weaknesses
exactly.
are that they are going to be easily swarmed, so factions that have the ability to surround you and outtrade you. For example, lizardmen have red-crested skinks, which will trade significantly into pretty much all of your infantry. So you're going to have to balance about the fact that you are the most expensive of the human factions. You're basically, and I hate to make this comparison, but you're the high elves for humanity, where each of your soldiers is a little bit more elite than, let's say, Bretonia or the Empire, but each time they die, it really matters. You lose a unit of Streltsy, that is a lot off the battlefield. You lose a unit of Griffin Legion, that's going to hurt a lot more than, let's say, the Empire losing the Empire Knights.
I see. And the main sort of ability that Kislev has, aside from the fact that we have hybrid stuff, we have slightly more expensive stuff, as you just stated, and then we have your very own ability, which is Buy Our Blood or BoB,
Yep, the
um,
best named
the
ability
best
in the
named
game.
ability in the game. I obviously agree. How does that work, and does it influence, how you play Kislev, or is it just a sort of like one-time free use? I don't need to worry about leadership. Let's move on.
It is key for good Kislev play. BoB basically allows your units to hold for about, I believe it's 25 seconds
Every time
extra
my
after they
units think
reach.
about BoB, they last longer.
E-
Is that
Exactly.
okay?
I help the units last a little bit
Yeah,
longer, is the way
excellent.
you can think about it. But it really helps them hold that line and, prevents them from being shocked down. So abilities that kind of try and do like terror bombs or leadership bombs don't work as well on Kislev. And it generally lets you kind of play in this almost hybrid position where you're a normal unit, but your units kind of have undead characteristics where they're going to last a long time. So that lets you play in a way where you can know that your unit will hold just a bit longer. So if you think, okay, I have to sacrifice this unit, you know that it'll last for at least 25 more seconds, so you can get something else onto the field. You can play in a way where you know that your units are going to be solid. It's you lose your lord, it's okay, it's not the end of the world. On the flip side, a lot of times BoB will put your units in a situation where they're in a losing fight and they could have potentially, you know, gotten better if they had retreated and been able to get back
Yeah,
into range and
sometimes
shoot their
BoB
range.
makes a stupid mistake. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. BoB will make you last too long, and by
yeah.
the end of it, you'll only have one or two units left that are going to either shatter off the field or you need to desummon so that you can get your units back in the pool. BoB helps them last very long, but BoB can prevent them from getting back into the pool.
Yeah, there is such a thing as lasting too long, apparently.
Hmm.
I never had this problem, but let's move on. Uh,
Can't say can't say I'm very familiar either.
one
So
one thing that I have, I have been learning Kislev lately, so I'm not yet someone that I think is like expert in this faction like you. But one thing that I have found coming here from a dwarfish background, I guess, is that this faction has a very interesting. This might just be my style, or it might just be wrong. Tell me. Interplay between having extremely defensive infantry and extremely offensive cavalry. So you end up playing almost many matches almost like it was at the very beginning, and then as the game goes on, the style changes a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, while you bring your Griffin legions in, and the hybrid nature of your units changes between shooting and then going to melee, then shooting again, and so on. Is that something that I'm making up, or there's some truth to that?
I feel like extremely accurate and really good observation on how a lot of times Kislev plays. You can play very aggressive at the start with a lot of your cav at the beginning, but most traditional Kislev builds play very similar to that, where you're gonna be on the back foot with the objective at the start of the match, but generally be up in value, and then towards the mid and late game, you're gonna shift into that mobility role and really start to push forward with your cav, because your cav's offensive output is exceptional, but because of its cost, it is not very good as a defensive cav like the Empire, where you can kind of play slowly and build up. You really have to get that point where you move all your units as a critical momentum shift. So like you were saying at the beginning, very kind of slow, dwarvish style, where you're kind of, in one defensive pocket, and then as the game starts to open up in the mid and late stages, your mobility starts to move in, the individual units kind of start to shine, your overlap fire allows you to push forward and really kind of go into that more offensive role.
Excellent. That means I am learning at least a few things. Right.
Absolutely.
Let's begin with our roster review, if you don't mind. I'm gonna let you take the lead here because you are the most experienced player. So let's begin with the Lords of Kislev.
All right. So right off the get-go, the number one thing you got to know with the Lords, the Ice Witch, best Lord for Kislev. It is going to be the meta Lord 9 times out of 10. Between the two lores of Ice and Tempest, both of them are good. Let's all quickly go through the lore of Ice, what spells are worth it. Ice Maiden's Kiss is a good spell. It is useful to clear chaff, very similar to Wind Blast. Ice Sheet is a niche spell. You can find some builds that work with it, but it's if you're a beginner just starting with Kislev, it's kind of a trap. I would not recommend it. Similar to Frostblades, it can be useful, but very niche, not worth it most of the time. Death Frost is an excellent Spirit Leech ability. Oftentimes you'll take just the Lord and Death Frost, and you can pretty much Spirit Leech down the enemy Lord the entire game. Crystal Sanctuary, also very niche. It can work with some Ice Glaive builds, some Streltsy builds, but for the most part, you're not going to really want to mess with it because it's extremely high cost.
Yeah, it costs a lot.
And you cannot move, so a lot of times if you put it on a unit, if your opponent is paying attention, he'll just walk away. And then Heart of Winter is one of those spells where it used to be a popular spell, but now because blobbing with a lot of different units, monstrous infantry is not quite as meta. It's not as popular as it was at the beginning of Warhammer 3. It's an okay spell, but it really is one of those spells that's outclassed by something similar like Final Transmutation. So it can be used. You can find some builds where you're using it because the enemy is going to blob up heavily, or they're relying on something that's a large alpha strike on your Lord. Then it can be useful, but for the most part, I would avoid it. For the lore of Ice, Ice Maiden's Kiss and Death Frost are going to be your best spells. Lore of Tempest, I personally like a bit more. Hailstorm, the first spell, is basically Searing Doom from the lore of Metal. Super useful, great into cav, great into armored infantry. Just a very good spell overall. Gust of True Flight is very good if you're going to be doing an artillery duel build. So if you're going to have double Little Grom and you're going to be facing, let's say, a lot of a lot of catapults or enemy cannons, then you can Gust of True Flight your Grom, and that'll allow you to outtrade with most other artillery. Aside from that, it's a very niche spell. Swiftwing, terrible, not useful. Biting Wind, also pretty bad. It's slow, not useful, inefficient. Blizzard is a fantastic spell, really good spell. I often like using it in gunline builds or builds where I have a lot of units. As the enemy is starting to close in, you throw your Lord on the unit, get that unit to blob around your Lord, and then you just drop a Blizzard, and it pretty much kills everything up to almost Chosen. But it'll kill 1,000 gold units straight up with an Overcast. Super good spell. Hawks of Niska is a fantastic spell into demon factions and undead factions because you get that -16 discouragement. So if you can combine it with the cav charges or basically any way to do shock leadership damage, you can disintegrate a lot of demons pretty much from half health onward. I think it's an extremely useful and underrated spell. Also very good against greenskins or any kind of low leadership faction that you know you're going to have a couple opportunities to throw a vortex on like a small blob, like a Skaven, for example. It's very good against them.
So abilities and items. So far,
Yes.
I've seen Guardian Call being almost like an always take ability. Am I wrong?
It's fantastic. Having a pocket summon of a snow leopard is really good. It lasts just long enough to generally be useful and get its damage off. Always worth the 100 gold that it cost. Arcane Conduit, I think, is useful for if you play land battle. Almost always useless in domination, though. Glacial Blast. If you're on the bear or the frostworm, sometimes it can be useful, but for the most part, it's not used. And for the two lore passives, Freezing Wind can be a decent lore passive if you're spamming Hailstorm or Gust of True Flight. For the lore of Ice, if you're spamming Ice Maiden's Kiss, the Frost Shield is alright. They're not like stellar by any, like none of their passives are stellar, but like they're solid. As far as items go, the Iron Ice armor is good if you have a Warbear or Frostworm. But aside from that, if you're just going super cheap on foot or on just a horse, not that useful. The Snowflake Pendant, not very useful. I don't think I've used that in a game in 2 years now.
How about the mount options? Is there, like, usually I basically see the witch either on foot, on warhorse, or on the worm, never on the warbear. Is that something that you would agree with, or are there use cases for the bear?
I would say anytime there's a use case for the bear, the worm would generally be better, even though it's a bit more expensive. It's the bear kind of seems to stagger a decent amount and just it doesn't perform very well, and it's kind of at an awkward place when you place it on the Ice Witch, where it's a decent combat character but like not insanely good. I'd say, like, if I had to break it down, I would say 40% of the time I just take the Lord on foot, make it as cheap as possible, pretty much only get the spells plus Guardian Call. Then maybe, 20% of the time on a warhorse, just as a fast unit. If I know that I'm going to be either pursued by the enemy and I need to constantly move my Lord, I'll do that. Or if I just know that it's a big map and I need to make sure my positioning is good for spells. And then the other 40% of the time is that Frostworm. You have that along with the Iron Ice armor, and it's solid. It's a really good anti-infantry, anti-large unit that really can just kind of bully most other legendary lords that are not dedicated combat lords. It does suffer the Frostworm if you get surrounded by monstrous infantry like Minotaurs. It'll die pretty quickly, but aside from that, very, very survivable.
And it also, I think, has terror, yes. So
yes.
That's also another thing to consider there. Excellent. So this is you would say the best Kislev lord, the one would have to
With,
pick like 90% of the, or maybe 80% of the time, yeah?
without a doubt. I know there are some players like Solo who enjoys the crossbow lord, the Druzina or whatever, and
Sell
occasionally
me this
Borth.
lord, since we're here. Sell me this. I have never understood this lord at all, aside from the fact that it looks cool. Why would you ever
Yeah,
pick this?
I personally am not a huge fan. I think some people like them because number one, cheap. It has restock, which is just useful in general, uh, and can be used kind of as a slow poke lord against other large targets. I personally feel like it's kind of a bit too costly and just doesn't do quite enough damage. But as far as non-combat cheap lords, it's pretty decent. I haven't played enough, true, honestly, with their abilities to know if like Tal's Judgment is a great one or not. It
I
kind of
have
seems
been
like a discount.
disappointing a lot by this spell, by this ability.
Yeah, it feels like it's a worse version of Arrows of Kurnus, so
Yes.
I haven't really enjoyed it. The Blessed Helm kind of seems like one of those very niche items. Having Heroic Killing Blow on a mostly ranged lord is a bit silly. It's not really that useful. And then this Cursed Frontier, it's kind of like it can be used again if you're in like a like I can see him being useful if you have a Grom base build where you're going to be wanting to restock, you're going to want to kind of eke out as much damage from specific range units as possible. Uh, and if you bring him, as far as heroes go, that does give you access to Ulrika, which is actually quite a good hero. So if you're trying to do a build with an Ulrika style, uh, then that's where you can kind of take this lord. But generally, Ulrika kind of combos well more with Boris or Ursus.
Let's talk about
But
Boris.
Boris is the only lord I would say that's worth taking on his bear because he gets a unique bear that absolutely slaps. He's basically just a fantastic tank. Almost all of his abilities are useful. Stand your ground is debatable. That's dealer's choice. I know some people like taking it, some people don't. The armor is great. The shard blade ability is fantastic. It is one thing to note about the shard blade. It works significantly better against the lower entity models. So against monsters infantry, against just a single character that comes in. And a lot of times people think, oh, I just see the ability damage per second 30 to 67. Let me put this on a blob with a bunch of infantry. It will do okay damage, but it'll generally disappoint you. Lower entities are better for the shard blade. All that to say, Boris is a fantastic lord if you just want someone to just go in and beat the hell out of whatever large target your enemy has. He's going to be expensive. Never bring him on the warhorse. His custom bear is always worth the extra 200. And he's just an absolute tank. Very good. Careful if he gets isolated, if you pull too far, especially if you use his ability that rages him out, the Fury of Urson.
Yeah, it's a
one of his
bound
natural
ability,
abilities.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good ability. Just make sure you pop it at the right time
Really
because you do cause terror for yourself, or cause a rampage for yourself.
Excellent. How about
As
the
far
standard Boyar? I've been weirdly, like, perhaps because my expectations were so low, but I've been weirdly not extremely disappointed by him. His Axe of Thor is really, really good, I think.
Yeah, that's the one ability I found use for him for is that one niche of just stripping everything except for the axe, and then he's like 900 and pretty cheap, and then the axe does. It seems like pretty decent damage comparable to like a Uranus Thunderbolt.
Yeah. So basically,
But
his use cases is I want a cheap lord on foot so that it's harder to kill him. That might have some burst, and that's about it.
exactly, is it useful in like 9 out of 10 scenarios? No. Are there better lords than him? Yes. Is he an absolute throw if you use him? No. He's just kind of meh. I will say, Kostalton, on the other hand, I have been extremely disappointed with him every time I've used him or played against him. I'm not sure if there's something on the Warbear that causes him to kind of uh, connect poorly or what, but I would say, like, of all the legendary lords, he's probably the worst one. I just haven't had a lot of positive games with him. I've had some games where he tanks pretty well and like he's been useful as a distraction card effects, but never one where I go like, wow, I really need to coast Alton. He carried that game. His abilities are fine, you know. The Urson's Ward definitely worth taking. The Courage Sacrifice can be worth taking depending on how tight you want to play it because he's at 25% health. That's when it starts. Uh, his Blaze of Devotion is solid, and then as far as, and this will kind of be the same thing with the Patriarch Prayers. Yeah, Urson's Roar, useless. Song of Winter Sunlight, great ability, immediately puts your units on fresh, super useful. Salix Lullaby is by far the best of the prayers. It's just a big heal, very useful for you. You get 3 of them, you plop that down, and it has no maximum amount of units. So really, you can just have 80 or units getting this heal off. And then Thor's Battle Hymn, I personally, there might be some people that find use with like a Things of the Woods build that uses it, but for the most part, I think it's not worth the 200.
So let's take this, occasion to have a little detour for the Patriarch. Because basically,
Yes.
Costalton is a bigger Patriarch, right?
Yes.
So Patriarchs are just heal bots. Am I wrong in thinking about this?
No, you're absolutely correct. Most of the time, it's going to be very similar to how you have it, where they are just 550 heal bots. You put them in reserve, and you have them pulled out to fight with your army. Occasionally, you can have the Salix Lullaby, Song of Winter Sunlight, and the item that they have that does +5/+5, and that can make them pretty useful as a kind of not a frontline fighter, but like a frontline support piece, almost like a the battle paladin that the Empire has. I forget the name.
The Warrior
But that
Priest?
hero. Yeah, that's pretty much the same words, but just arranged differently.
Kind of in the same ballpark, I guess, yeah.
Yeah,
He
the
seems
battle
to
priest.
be a lot worse of a fighter than the Warrior Priest, though.
Yes, yeah, he's definitely in that support position. The lack of armor whenever he's not on a warbear makes it where even if he's fighting chaff, he'll eventually get chipped down. So you really you could play him kind of just kind of like a Nurgle cultist, but not quite that same amount of power where you just want to put him and make sure he's in a blob. But he can be useful there. His warbear and his warhorse could be fine. Like I've been saying, I haven't had a lot of success with dedicated warbear units. I feel like I don't know if something's off with their hits or whatnot, but I find that they oftentimes don't connect as well as you would expect them to. So it's an alright unit, I would say. But most of the time, you're going to be just your basic 550 cost unit with just the heal
With
and
3
no
heals,
item.
yeah. And then you desummon
Yeah.
it and eventually bring it back again, correct?
Exactly.
Let's keep going. So is Catherine just a nice witch on a chariot?
She's very useful, I'd say. She's basically if you want to have just that little plus. I think because her spell kit is the Ice Maiden's Kiss, all that jazz, you're kind of missing out on some of the better, I think, Kislev spells. But oftentimes you find her on her the Frostworm or the Sled plus Death Frost, and she just basically becomes a dedicated I'm gonna kill your Lord unit. Frostfang, as far as her items go, is a pretty solid item. And the Crystal Cloak, I feel like, is useful if you're on the Sled or the Worm, where it makes it kind of worth having that 20% resistance. Definitely her Sled is where she is the most dangerous, and for certain matchups, it is absolutely insane to deal with. If you don't have, because it's very fast, you have a 84 speed Sled that has a ton of mass and pretty much goes through most chaff like their butter. So if you don't bring something, either dedicated shooting or some form of dedicated mass that can slow her down, you can just lose straight up
Yes,
against her.
she
If she,
can wipe
if
all armies by herself. Yeah.
absolutely. And they did fix this, where I don't think the ice glaives are shooting while she's routing anymore, but she does have two little ice glaive women shooting that do frostbite, so it reduces your speed by 30%, meaning even if you do have a fast unit, if they get shot by her, they're going to be reduced in speed, so it's going to be very, very hard to catch up with her.
Mother of Stankia. I have not been able to understand what this lore is about. Um, the lore of Hag seems really weird to me.
Yeah,
Goulias and Spirit Bear are both a heal and a sort of magical projectile thing, which seem
yeah.
decent, but other than that, I don't. Please do
It's a
yourself.
It's a very weird lore because each spell, if you overcast it, becomes a buff versus a debuff.
Oh, I didn't know
So
this.
yeah, so some of the things, it just is a matter of you have to test it to find what's good. Um, but one very weird kind of interaction, and hopefully CA fixes this. There is a issue that spell mastery does not affect any of their spells, so they're capped at 100% spell mastery. You can't get them to get any bonus, so any sort of I don't think Mother Ostankia has it, but there are a few different things that get you spell mastery. They just straight up don't work with the lore. Uh, so with that in mind, it is kind of a mid lore. The Forbidden Fens is the first spell. Is okay, not very useful. I mean, it can be good. It's kind of like the ice sheet spell, where if you have a specific plan for it, it's fine. The overcast version of it, I haven't found much use of it. Um, Witch's Brew is a decent spell, I would say, actually. Basically the same thing as the Ice Maiden's Kiss, but you're going to poison the target. Overcast, though, is pretty nice because it does heal all of your units and then gives them a vigor refresh. It's not a huge heal, but it's enough. Uh, Curse of the Ancient Witch is I actually do like this one. The chaining can act very weird, but if you can get the spell on a target and then target it with, let's say, if you have the
Streltsy?
ROR, Streltsy is a good one, but if you have the ROR, what are they called? The Akshinas Ambushers, the Wolf Hearts, you put the pack trap on them and then get your ambushers to attack. It does a massive amount of damage just by reducing all of that armor. It really makes it where you can surprise a lot of your enemies. The Overcast version, which does the chain that does a bunch of increased missile damage and reload skill, is pretty useful, but like once again, kind of niche. That's really, I feel like, is the name of the game with this lore. Lore Hag is like, if you don't have a plan for how you're going to use each spell very specifically, then it's outclassed by just about every other lore. And even with a plan, it still might be outclassed by the other lores that Kislev has. Spirit of Vengeance, or Vengeance of the Spirits, rather, is it's fine. Don't use the Overcast thing. It's completely useless because you cannot use spell mastery with the lore. Uh, the Giant Chalice, let's see, yeah, the Cursed Cauldron ability, the Bombardment, against AI, useful. Against human players, 9 times out of 10, they're going to just avoid it because it's cool. It lasts a long time.
Yeah, it has a really cool animation, I guess. But
yeah, it's definitely one of the coolest looking spells in the game. But like most players will have time to just dodge it. Uh, yeah, between the Cursed Cauldron or the Blessed Cauldron, uh, the Overcast version. Again, kind of, what's the point of it? You're
yeah,
just spending a lot of Winds of Magic. And then the Malediction of Madness. It costs a ton, but it does give Rampage, so it can be useful for that alone because Rampage is such a strong ability. But given the fact that Kislev, it has okay ways to punish Rampage. Like, let's say if you Rampage a unit and get them to run into your gun line, it's very useful. But like, I find for the most part, it's a good spell, but not like a 10 out of 10 spell. Not as good as any of the other rampage spells that exist in the game.
So we can translate all this stuff essentially into the Hag Witch, right?
Yes.
But you do have several more lores that we don't need to go very in depth in because there will be other videos about stuff. But you do have the lore of the
Yes.
Hag, and each Hag Witch is a chariot. So there's that to you know to talk about. So they can be quite effective into lower tier chaff. And they
Yes.
also have unique abilities. Is there any, like for example, to me this one seems quite good. The Beast Hag can summon a thing in the woods. Is that something that is as good as it sounds, or is it just a cute thing more than anything else?
Oh, no, you're right. Lore of so of the four different ones, the Lore of Beasts, one that gives you the summon of the things in the woods is easily the
I
best
can
one.
see something like this being
Yep.
relatively decent.
Yep, that's a very kind of meta loadout for her. The one thing with the chariots is they have a ranged attack. It's kind of shitty, just by the angle of fire, so don't expect to get a ton of damage or value from that. The Lore of Death ability that they have, not very useful. Shadows, not very useful. I have not tested the Lore of Hags hero ability, but I think it could find some use into demonic factions,
Yeah.
just because Kislev doesn't have a lot of access to magic damage directly on their units. So I could see her plus, let's say, a Griffin Legion being used as a cycle charging combo against Zinj or Demons of Chaos, something where you know you're going to be like diving blues or plagues or anything like that. But for the most part, Lore of Beasts, if you're going to pick the Hag, which you're probably going to pick the Lore of Beasts, you're probably going to go Flock of Doom, and you're probably going to bring the things in the woods. That's probably the most meta.
Excellent. So we have talked about Felix and Gotrek in the dwarf video. The Frost Maiden, does she have any different use cases? I mean, she seems substantially worse than the witch simply because she doesn't have the cat summon. Like if
Yep.
she had the Guardian Call, she would be like 10 times better in my modest opinion.
Nope,
Uh,
you're absolutely right. Ice Shard's an okay ability, but for the most part, if you are gonna bring a lord like I don't know, like Boris or one of the cheap generic lords, then you're probably gonna bring one of the heroes, and then you're just gonna drop everything
yeah.
except for maybe put her on a warhorse with one spell, and then throw her in reserve, and then she's pretty cheap. Then it's like a decently like yeah, I can summon this in start of the
Yeah,
game.
600, yeah. So we now
But
have two somewhat unique um, ladies of Kislev, I guess.
yes.
Ulrika and the Golden Knight, which in my opinion is the coolest looking character in the roster, but I have not been able to make any use of her unless when she somehow manages to tie down a spellcaster because she has the silence ability, Totem of Ursus. Am I doing it wrong, or is she like as she looks like a bit too expensive for her role as a magic denying duelist?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There are some players that I know enjoy using her, but I definitely find her to be a bit uh, too expensive for the role, and kind of it kind of speaks to how you play Kislev, where if you play with her, the Golden Knight, you're gonna kind of need to play a ganking style build, and you can do that with Kislev, but in my opinion, I don't find them as enjoyable playing them as like a dedicated hero snipe build or lord snipe build. So it's really a matter of how you want to play. If you combined her with like Boris Ursus or Cat on the sled, then like Very can do a ton of damage. But it really requires you shifting from that like kind of balanced play style to more of just like, all right, I got to really index hard into sniping their lord, and if I don't do that, the rest of my units, because I have so much money invested here, are probably going to trade down into the enemy units. Because for the most part, with Kislev, where I kind of find things, is they're going to need to have as much money as possible put into their initial army.
How about Ulrika? Does she have anything special? She seems at the same time a really good fighter and extremely squishy at the same time. But she does bring good spells on the table, I guess.
Yeah,
To the table.
Melkost is awesome. She's super useful if you want to deny enemy cavalry between her ranged Melkost. The Silver Dagger, it's okay. The Blood Shard, also okay. Not really that useful because it's based on kill intensity. All of her Smoke and Mirror is useless. Fire Blood's great for her. The Hunger's good for her. The Dancing Blade, again, niche. And then the Fall is great because you can imbue Blinded, which is super useful. And I think her Blinded is slightly better because it
Yes,
also
it
reduces
is.
the speed by 50%.
Speed is normally affected, yes.
Yeah. So she's super useful as there's going to be cavalry on the enemy team. Not anymore.
But like the witch, like all the Kislev ladies are very susceptible to being sniped. So be careful with
Yes.
them. Like, none of them are extremely tanky.
Yeah. Yeah, like Ulrika, if she's on foot, probably never worth it because she only has like 3,900 health.
Yeah.
But on the warhorse, pretty decent, but still 4,500 health. That's like, I don't know, 4 spirit leeches, 3 spirit leeches before she starts to crumble.
Yeah. Let's move on to the infantry and the missile infantry. Basically, as far as I can understand, Kislev infantry is quite self-explanatory, with one bit of an exception, which is the armor Kossar. I think it's a very interesting unit.
Yes.
It used to be, as far as I'm aware, like an always take 5 unit, because it is almost a long beard that can last quite a bit of time. It's armored, it has a silver shield, it has decent shooting and decent melee, so it kind of seems like the ideal frontline unit.
Yeah.
But with the nerfs it has received, its price just seems to be just slightly too much for what it used to be. Not to say that it is bad, but it's no longer an always take 5. It might be an always take 2 or an always take 3.
Yeah, I think they found a really good balance point with it. It used to definitely be overpowered, and at this point, here's how you can kind of think about it. In my opinion, is armored corsairs are gonna trade well into most stuff, but like anything that's cheaper than them that can do AP damage will outtrade them. So they'll do fine into other chaff, but once they start to deal with the same amount of cost that's coming at them that has AP, they're gonna downtrade. So kind of with that in mind, if you're fighting like elves, where you know you're gonna deal with like a bunch of spears and bows and stuff, then your silver shields are gonna come in handy super well. But like now, let's say against Norska, might have some use against them, but against like lizards, where they used to be a take 5, now I would say it's almost like a trap unit into lizards.
Yes, I think that right now you need to take them either if their armor is going to be a big factor or the shield.
Yes.
If none of those two things apply or have a very big impact, you might just not take them, or just take 2. Like then, I don't think you can have like a bad build if you have 2 of these, but you can if you go like this at every start of the match right now. But
Yeah, absolutely. If you do that at the start of the match, you're definitely going to run into people that just overwhelm you very quickly. But like 2 of them, kind of flank guards, great idea.
the unit that is bad, I think, is the Great Weapon Armored Kossar.
Yes.
Because it's an expensive, slow unit like the Armor Kossar, but the Armor Kossar is a defensive unit,
Yes.
especially with BoB. Everyone is defensive with BoB around. But the Great Weapon unit seems to be caught in the middle of like 2 design philosophies, and it has somehow managed to gain the worst traits of both. Like, it's a below average line holder and a below average, offensive, I'm going to rush you down unit because it costs too much.
You're absolutely correct. If they drop the price by 50, or if they increase the charge bonus, gave some utility to it, I could see it being useful. But like honestly, between the ranged cap and the
Oh
cost
yeah,
of
it's
them,
true. You also have to consider that.
I would say it's almost never worth bringing Great Weapon Armored Kossars. I would say they're probably the worst unit on the Kislev roster. Them or the Elemental Bear, I'd say
Yeah,
is the
I think.
and
Yeah. Also,
yeah,
one thing we haven't talked about because it might be obvious, but almost almost every infantry unit except from the warriors and the Zargards are an hybrid unit, which means they have a melee
yes,
and a shooting attack. But for
yes,
Kossars, I would consider them almost like an afterthought. Just put them in guard mode and have them pepper a unit while they charge at them. Don't consider the shooting attack uh, core to them unless to finish off like a flying lord that is routing, for example. So just very niche cases. Uh,
yeah. And I found some players that have done this. I believe it was Catholic Alcoholic. I saw one of his replays. Someone or in cars that was using Kossars with shields to basically run into melee first so that they could clear the chaff. It was against a Tomb Kings player where they were able to clear the chaff, not use any of the range, and then in the later stages of the battle, turn fire at will back on so then the Kossars could shoot at all the large targets. Their AP is not going to be that great with their pistols, but it does enough where, like, if
yeah,
you're shooting at shielded chaff, you're not going to get your value. But if you're shooting at anything that's like 1,000 gold
yeah.
plus
If the
monsters,
unit is
it's
healthy
very
enough,
very useful.
eventually it will add up.
Yeah, and I think kind of one of the keys with Kosar play is like figuring out when do I want to put them into melee and charge, and when do I want them to just be in guard mode shooting. Kind of finding that balance is kind of that next level of Kislev play. I feel like.
The ROR armored Kossar, the Watchman in the Night, is a strange unit as well. Um,
Yes.
it seems to be something like a chaff blender type of unit, um,
Yes.
but losing the shield is a really big deal in my opinion, and not really gaining that much in the melee defense department uh, compared to the normal Kossar. Um, are there any particular matchups or situation where you would think I can't leave home without the Watchman in the Night?
I can't leave home without them. No. Where they're actually usable, yes. I think that if you put them, probably not a good unit to have in your starter army. You almost always want to have them in your reinforcement army. Uh, and I think like against Skaven, against possibly wood elves, but not really wood elves, but like Skaven, some of the undead factions, they can be useful as long as you like. If you're against Skaven and they have a weapons team up, that unit is basically useless. So it can be useful if that situation kind of arises where you need like a late game unit to just plow through 3 or 4 chaff units that are on a point. But for the most part, it's kind of going to be overshadowed, especially because it's only 50 gold less than Zarguards with
Yeah.
shields, which are a very solid unit. Uh, which I guess moving on to them, yeah, Zarguards with shields, fantastic unit as far as a holding one goes. Expensive, so be careful. It has the same problem as elite elf units where they're very bunched up together, so explosive damage will absolutely wreck you. But they will hold very well. They got tons of armor, tons of leadership, super useful unit. The Great Weapon version, unlike Armored Kossars, is actually a very useful unit for some late game punch or just needing to blender through armor. Really, I find him useful with like Warriors of Chaos, occasionally even Dwarfs, even though that's kind of a cursed matchup for Kislev.
Yeah.
Uh, but really, any time where you need like a very solid, dedicated anti-infantry armor-piercing unit, the Zarguard is actually, I think, one of the better elites in the game. The ROR version, it's okay. The fire resistance is useful in some matchups,
Oh,
like
it's really
Corn.
big. I hadn't noticed it was so big.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
sorry. I hadn't noticed it was so big. But it is quite substantial, 40%.
Yeah, and then it has the ability to give everyone around it vigor per second, so it is useful as kind of that later game summon, but because a lot of your expensive late game summons I find to be Cav, it kind of fits that awkward role of like you can have him in your reinforcing army, but you just never find the time to pull him out because you're like, oh, I need Cav way more urgently than I'm gonna need just some
Yeah, a
great weapons.
slow armor killer. Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of the last infantry unit, the Kislev Warriors, these are, in my opinion, the new, maybe not take 5, but, consider at least taking 5 Kislev unit.
Yes.
Cheap, kind of unbreakable AP anti-large with charge reflection is an extremely good combination for any race, and especially for an army that wants to be defensive at the start, like Kislev. These units are like some of the best combinations of attributes Kislev could want in almost all of its armies.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. My hot take is that I actually prefer to have more of them in reserve, but that's also because I like to start most of my Kislev armies with 12 range units like stacked up.
Which is understandable, but yes.
Yeah, it really it's a super useful unit. It'll trade up into pretty much every cav and trade down into every infantry. So really that's the big deal with it, is if you don't get it into a good fight, you're gonna lose value, which is the key weakness of Kislev is trading down. But if
with
you
AP
put it in,
and BoB,
yeah,
they will still hold enough to allow maybe a cute countercharge or to get your range into position. So yeah, don't get them into infantry, but they'll still have a purpose against the infantry, I guess.
Really, they kind of embody the name of the game with Kislev, where it's you have to use your combined arms to make all the units shine themselves. And when you get a Kislev warrior holding, it's great because that means you can get your glorious charge off on them and you can get all the range shooting. So very solid unit.
Now I think we move a bit like dwarves into the meatiest and most important part of the roster, which is the ranged units. Usually this will be at least a good like 60% of what wins you the game with Kislev in one reason or another. No, it's not gonna be your melee infantry, it's gonna be your missile infantry and obviously your cav with Kislev. So this is probably, in my opinion, like the most important, at least for my style of Kislev, the most important part of the roster.
100% agree.
What can you tell us about normal Cossars? They're still an hybrid unit, but they trade their guns for bows, and they have less armor.
Yes, they are
that,
a great unit. If you can use at least 10 out of their 20 ammunition, they're generally going to pay for themselves. But they are, I'm not sure the exact stat breakdown compared to like an Empire Spearman or Swordsman, but I feel like their stats are somewhat comparable to that, where their melee is pretty mediocre. Yeah, you can compare the stats right there.
So they have more health. Sorry, no, wait, that's not how it works. They have less health. Yeah. They're slightly worse, but they're quicker, and they have Bayar Blood and a range weapon. Melee defense is the stuff that kind of seems to suffer the most.
Yeah, so they just don't trade well one-on-one, but if you get, say, 3 or 4 Corsairs shooting, and they're shooting at the same target, they're gonna kill the target really quick just by volume of fire. So I think they're both pretty, like both the spear version and the regular version are good to always have a few in your army, just to make sure you get chip damage and throw down something that can be useful to slowly whittle your enemy. Not a very good unit on its own. Like you'd almost never want to just put a Kossar on a point alone, because if they throw, pretty much anything 1v1 for the same price, it's going to beat the Kossar. But if you have 3 or 4 Kossars on a point and you can slowly kite back, then they're really going to shine. I like the spear version a little bit more. I find the utility of having that spear just to be useful to fend off light cav dives or anything like that.
And the increased melee defense, I think that the 50 gold is more than justified if you can.
Yeah. Really, if you have 50 gold, get a spear. The normal one doesn't provide really anything over the spear version. Moving on to the best the 850 units in my opinion are the best ranged tools that Kislev has. Akshina ambushers are super solid, really good at kiting. They are slightly faster than most infantry, so you can kite with them. Their AP values are not like they were on launch. When they launched, they were just absurdly broken. But now they kind of are in that in-between spot where they do a little bit of AP damage, but they're not quite like a gun unit. Really good at fending off skirmish cav. Because you have that stalk, you can almost always get a straight-up volley into the face of Marauder Horsemen or really any sort of unit like that and do a ton of damage. Ambusher, if you combine it with the ROR unit, you can pack trap a unit, and that pretty much locks them in place, and you can do some really devastating ambushes with them. I think the Akshina Ambusher is a solid unit for Kislev. Streltsy, in my opinion.
Just a quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Where do you I have always been using the ROR ambusher and Streltsy, but and also the ROR Streltsy, but never the normal ambusher. Where would I use the normal ambushers and not the Streltsy?
So you will use your normal ambushers over Streltsy when you, number one, want to have like a really strong initial vanguard, just because they have the stealth and vanguard. They're a little bit quicker. I like to combine the normal ones with the ROR. Generally speaking, I feel like I'll take the ROR before I take any of the normal ones most of the time. So if you have the normal, you might as well also have the Wolf Hearts. But they're pretty much going to be useful over Streltsy in situations where you want to have a little bit more kind of presence initially on the battlefield.
So it's a map
Streltsy
thing.
build, yeah, I would say it's a map thing, matchup thing as well, but it really is just like how do you want to set it up? Because with your Streltsy, you're imagine you're kind of like a little porcupine, where anyone approaches you, you're going to shoot them, and you don't have a lot of agency unless the enemy approaches you. Whereas the ambushers, because they have stalk, you can kind of have a little bit more agency of when you approach the enemy, you can get off those initial volleys. You can kind of dictate a little bit more of the terms of the engagement than a Streltsy-centered build.
Speaking of, my favorite unit in the roster, the Streltsy.
Fantastic unit.
Yes.
Always keep them in guard mode. Always keep them with their fire at will active. That will let them shoot even if they're somewhat compromised. But they are the best air deterrent that I feel like Kislev has. One of the best anti cav deterrents that they have. If you can shoot armored cav, really you put them in a box formation. You have a couple of them all checkerboarded out, and you can just last samurai anything that charges in. Super satisfying unit, even more so with the ROR, which gets a shotgun. And that thing, I believe, and I'm trying to, I believe it was this where I pretty much had the ROR Streltsy shooting against Wrathmongers that were coming at me, and the Wrathmongers were coming just charging the unit, and by the time they reached the ROR Streltsy, they had maybe 100 health left. I
have never had a game in which they didn't pay for themselves, I think.
Yes.
At the very least.
Unless they're getting bombarded down by range. They are susceptible to enemy archers or enemy artillery, but if they get their shots off, they're gonna print money. Very super useful unit.
And also they're not trash in melee.
Yes.
Which is important.
They last quite a bit. They will like Streltsy will trade down into something like Furies, but they last long enough where you could easily get a Griffin Legion or a Winged Lancer charge onto that onto the Fury, disintegrate them, and you'll have more than enough Streltsy units left standing to still fight. Plus their BoB passive makes it where they'll trade up even if they get dived by something really strong.
How about Ice Guards? The one thing I have noticed is that they're actually quite good if they don't get immediately blasted by a spell or an artillery unit. Um,
Y- yes, exactly.
the thing is, the games
Uh,
where this happens are, a small percentage. So I end up taking them essentially only versus either undead or demons.
yes, very good against demons. I would say, like, I love them versus Tzeentch, Demons of Chaos. Not as much against, like, Khorne or anything like that. They can be useful against Nurgle. Also, pretty useful if you kind of play it well against, like, Wood Elves. They're on the docket to get a buff for their weapon strength, I believe, for the next 6.1 patch. And I think they do need that, but I don't think they're necessarily a bad unit. Um, I actually like them if I'm going to bring them. Like you said, they're always going to be targeted by spells, so I like to bring at least 2 of them if I'm going to bring them at all. And I find them to be pretty useful as like you're stacking up your ranged line. You have your armored corsairs in the front. You got your Streltsy gun line in the center, and then you have behind that you have your Ice Guard, and that kind of lets you have this firing pocket where their Arc of Fire is great. They'll apply slow. If the sword version gets dived by Furies, they'll beat the Furies. If the glaive version gets dived by Cav, it'll beat most of the Cav. It's also, you could do Ice Guard as the niche for where you bring Crystal Sanctuary is with like 3 Ice Guards in your build, and then you can do some pretty much like almost like indestructible little pockets where you got 3 of them shooting, and then nothing will really do a lot of damage to them for that 30 seconds or what have you, for however long the Crystal Sanctuary lasts.
The other big breadwinner for Kislev is their cavalry. I will take just these 2 units very quickly by saying Bear Riders are the, anti-large cav of Kislev. The War Bear Riders, the standard ones, seem kind of bad to me. I don't know if it's the relatively slow speed, the animations. Well, I never take these ones. I do often take the Oath Brothers of Thor because of their increased stats and the excellent Call of Thor ability, which can swing whole fights by itself because it inflicts blinded and does a little bit of damage. So if you do want War Bear Riders, do take the ROR. I do think, however, that both of these units are weirdly niche, even if Kislev wants some anti-large, simply because there is a lot of incidental ways of killing large stuff on the roster. Not just, direct anti-large like the warriors, but if you have like 6 bows and 6 Streltsy around in your army, a big monsters will get destroyed either way. Monsters 3 infantry or stuff like that is harder, but I don't think anti-large cav is something that every Kislev army needs.
You nailed it. That's 100% correct. Yeah, the Oath Brothers can also be used with a Boris build. Like if you're blobbing really well, that's where I find them to be like very useful. But like what you said, nailed it. Like for the most part, you have enough tools to deal with large anyway. As far as their baseline cav goes, Dervishes used to easily be the best light cav in the game, but with all the cost increases, they're okay. Fire Blood makes it so that they're super useful for diving enemy artillery. You can generally get most artillery offline by the time that their passive wears off. But aside from that, they'll trade worse into other light cav than they used to. Controversial take, Wing Lancers,
Yes,
I think, are
let's talk
overpriced.
about this.
Yeah, Wing Lancers versus Griffin Legion. Wing Lancers used to be very good at their old price point, but now for 1,000, I just don't think they provide enough utility over a Griffin Legion to justify bringing it. Because Griffin Legion pretty much have their stats just straight up better, except for speed. And the 250 really allows, it's not that much money. Wing Lancers, maybe if you I don't know, against Tomb Kings where you're going to get shot by Ushabti Great Bow, then Wing Lancers are better than Griffin Legion. But for the most part, I find myself taking 3 Griffin Legions a lot of games and maybe 1 Wing Lancer at most.
Yes.
It's just, I think it needs to drop either 50 gold or it needs to like gain some sort of additional benefit uh, over Griffin Legion to make it worth it. For the most part, right now, just overpriced.
Usually, what I'm starting to learn in my Kislev journey, I guess. At the
Mm.
beginning, it didn't really seem like such a big difference at the start. Then, the more you play, the more I'm starting to think about it like this. Do I want good cavalry? Then I want the Griffin Legion. Do I want a lot of cavalry? Then I can bring in the Winged Lancers.
Mhm.
Because the 250 gold increase feels like a long time when you want your heavy cav on the field, so it does need some justification. But the impact of a Griffin Legion on the battlefield is so much more than one Winged Lancer most of the
Yes.
time. So, do you want to swarm your opponent with cav? Then I guess bring Winged Lancers. But if you do want your cav to carry you, then you do want the Griffin Legion.
Yeah. I suppose that's a good way of putting it. And I suppose if like you're going to be swarming more ranged units, it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter the extra damage that a Griffin Legion does versus a Wing Lancer. So there are, I guess, some niches where it makes a lot of sense. Uh,
The,
but
the
yeah, I think
Griffin
for the
Legion
most
also
part,
is way cooler looking, by the way. So there's that as
that
well.
yeah, the
Yeah,
drip is just insane
just
off
look
of
at
those
the unit
guys.
card. Like this is, I mean, whatever. It's
Come on,
actually,
yeah,
yeah.
that's the real.
Miss,
Let's be honest, that's the real
I
reason.
mean, a golden warrior with wings on its back. Like, you know, come on.
So badass. How do you beat that? It just there's a level of I feel like when you see humans charging monsters and they just look so badass with their armor on, you're like, makes you proud.
Yeah. Missile cavalry and chariots. I would say that horse archers are just almost like the stereotypical skirmish cavalry unit
Yep.
that you would think, with Buyer Blood attached. So
Yep.
they have this incidental buff to their diving capability, but that's about it. They're neither bad nor good, except for the fact that they have Buyer Blood.
Yep. They're slightly, I think, better than normal dervishes if there wasn't a 12 unit missile cap. Them fighting for the missile cap really makes it hard, in my opinion, to justify bringing in a lot of them. But you can, I think a lot of players like to bring in like 3 horse archers right at the start of the game to cap points and kind of get some early momentum advantage with Kislev, and for that they're really good.
How about war sleds? War sleds used to be the terror of the competitive scene. Now they seem almost a bit too tame.
Yeah, I haven't found a lot of success with them since the changes to chariots that happened. Kind of seemed to nerf them. I think that light war sleds could probably drop 50 gold and have a little bit more of a niche. Heavy war sleds are still somewhat useful if you want to have like a piece to just really smash through the lines, but like you said, they are not nearly as good as they once were. So they kind of hit that awkward stage where you need them to use a lot of their ammunition, but it takes a long time for them to use their ammunition. So you want to be cycle charging with them, but they're not as good at cycle charging as they once were. So it's just a very micro intensive unit if you want it to be super effective.
Artillery for Kislev serves a very like one single purpose. Like the Little
Yes.
Grom allows you to leverage the fact that you, on average, have better units than your opponents. So
Yes.
your units are extremely susceptible to enemy artillery, and that's the one thing that Little Grom does excel at. It makes it so that the enemy artillery will be always threatened, except if it hides behind a rock, because it is a direct fire artillery piece. But that's what I think is like the 80% of what the Grom is there to do in most of your armies, to kill the enemy artillery, so that you can enact your own game plan. Incidentally, it's also very good against anything large, that, especially cavalry, I think, because it can kill multiple models of something like a Demigriff Knight if it hits the correct angle. Um, but I don't think you bring it to kill Cav. You bring it for other reasons, and then it can rack up some value against Cav.
I would actually somewhat disagree with that and say it is useful to bring if you know you're just gonna fight Cav. Like I like them versus Dark Elves, where I know that I'm gonna have to fight the Cold Ones, where Cold Ones will uptrade into your Griffin Legion just based on their stats. But a little Grom can shoot, and because they're like a 48 model count unit, it will easily pick off 10 to 20% off a single shot. So I think like verse low entity cavalry
So
factions,
elite Cav in
super
general,
useful.
we can say
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
elite cav in general. Oh, back when Grail Knights used to be just busted OP, Kislev still had a really strong matchup against them, and that it came down to Little Grom because Little Grom shooting into a lance formation, Grail Knight can get almost 1,000 value in a single shot. It's disgusting.
Let's talk about the monsters.
Yeah.
We talked about the Frostworm a bit before, talking about it as a mount. It's a generalist terror source that's a little bit better against infantry. I guess that's the main
Yep.
thing we can say, right? It
Yep.
has very
Some
good
people,
animations.
yeah, great animations that they fixed. It has collision, which makes it useful against infantry. Some people like them with double terror builds, where you have both your lord and one of these units out, and you can, greenskins, Skaven, that sort of thing. I find the unit on its own to be all right, like a good unit, but I almost like it as my lord mounted on one of them is 9 times out of 10 where I'm going to be using it.
The Snow Leopard, the one thing I have to say about it is that the portrait makes it look like a dog or a wolf, not a cat. Am I wrong? Like you need to get closer to
It
the
looks
screen and then it looks like a cat. But
okay.
if you're far away enough, it looks like a wolf. Am I dumb?
Okay. I mean, it looks like a leopard to me, but I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Still,
Uh,
let's talk about lesser important stuff. What does a snow leopard do? It's a fast, anti-large unit that's mostly used, I guess, versus characters or single entities rather than a full unit of
yes.
cav, simply because the way units deal damage. Like, this is just one unit, so it won't be like killing 5 models of Empire Nats in one strike,
Yes.
but it might.
They work.
Go ahead, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was gonna say they work really well in a unit together. So summoning like 2 leopards together, or have your leopard out, and then if you have your ice witch, you summon the leopard at the same time, and they can do really good against ganking. Where they also are useful is against monstrous infantry like trolls. So like a 12 unit count, you have them saturated in either your cav or your infantry, and they'll just slowly pick off models really effectively. They're not the tankiest of units. They're super fast, so you don't have to put them in any danger. But very good as like kind of like a I'm gonna throw this missile at my enemy to kill
Yeah.
whatever select unit I need.
The bears are kind of bad.
Yep.
I don't think we need to go too much into detail here. They are bad single entities. I hope they get a buff because they look really cool.
Yep.
But so far, even the breath attacks and the AoE around them and the spells and whatever, they're still too slow to do anything meaningful 90% of the time.
Yep. The ROR can occasionally be useful because of its spell, but like ever since it lost Unbreakable, it is not nearly as good. So I definitely think that if you're starting off with Kislev, avoid the bear. It's a trap.
The incarnate elemental of beasts. People tell me it's really good. I just see it die to any amount of arrow that has ever. Like, 3 orc boys will destroy it. Arrow boys will destroy it. But apparently I'm using it wrong, so.
Yeah, it really. I think neither you and I both like the gun line
Yes.
style of Kislev, so it makes it where it doesn't work super well with the beast brush style elemental incarnate. It is a good unit. I think it's useful against factions that don't have a lot of range, but you said, it definitely can get shot really quickly. 50 armor is pretty low. It doesn't have, yeah, it has no natural range resistance or anything like that. It has some spell and physical resistance, which is somewhat useful, but it can be good as like a, let's say you have a piece that needs to go to the side points and tear out some units while you have it backed up with Kislev warriors.
Yeah,
Then
at
it can
least
be
it
kind
has
of
a
useful.
mortis engine, I guess, but
Yeah, yeah. But like, I'd say like a solid useful if you can kind of build around it. But if you're trying to play a traditional Kislev and then throw in an elemental incarnate, you're gonna almost be weakening your build because you're gonna be trying to do too many things at once.
now this is a unit I have a lot of strong opinions that might not be necessarily based on anything factual. The things
All
in
right,
the
let me hear
woods.
your opinion. Yeah, as a dwarf main.
People think, people compare them to war lions. War lions are way better than things in the woods, okay?
Don't let the high elf mains hear that;
Yeah,
they will riot.
I don't think high elf mains watch my videos anyway. None of them none of them do.
They
Like
don't know how to use YouTube yet.
exactly. Like war lions have a lot of their costs um, invested in their survivability. So it makes sense that they don't kill stuff super fast like everyone wants them to do. Things in the woods don't really have the same amount of survivability as lions, but they are in the same cost bracket as lions. So they seem a lot more disappointing to me. They're supposed to be some sort of like a fast attack, anti-infantry unit, like a super hound,
Yeah.
but they're just a very slightly better hound on a unit that on a roster that doesn't really know how to leverage it really well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's accurate. They're kind of like the we have the blood beasts at home
Yes.
type of unit, where like they can be good if you have a very specific buffing build, but I definitely think that they have a hard time finding space on the roster. I think their cost is a bit too much. That being said, the ROR, because of its anti-healing ability that it gets, the Dark Blood Tainted, that is a super useful unit
Yes.
for Nurgle, for vampire
Undead.
counts,
Yeah.
basically, yeah, really any undead, any healing faction. Like I think if you combined like the ROR things in the woods plus like 2 snow leopards, that is a fantastic anti-healing gank squad. So that is where I feel like their niche is really good. But like the basic unit, nah, not. I haven't used it in 50 games. Very, very rarely do I use them anymore, especially after the nerfs. They're just kind of mediocre.
Let's quickly talk about um, maps.
Yes.
What kind of map does Kislev like? What kind of map does it not like?
So a map that they would like would be a map that has a solid home point, a very open gun lines, very strong lines of sight, not generally a ton of forest, and the ability that they can play defensive and eventually utilize their mobility. So something like Imperial Road is going to be one of the better Kislev maps. Like if you look
You have
at
the
it,
home
very
point
straightforward.
here, the middle
Yeah.
here, and the enemy opponents here. You only have one big forest. Does it not like
And you
get any problems with line of fire with guns? The fact that it has all of these hills.
the hills are almost all downward
Oh, I
facing,
see.
so you can position your units in a way where you can get good line of sight effectively. Um,
How about a bad
a,
map for Kislev?
a bad map for Kislev, I would say, would be something where it's going to be really tight. They don't have great line of sight. They're going to have to be bouncing a lot between points, and they don't really have the ability to kind of leverage their firing lines. So, like a competitive map that I feel like is really bad for Kislev is the Proving Grounds. Uh, it can be okay if like you can bait your opponent into going into your back line, but that map almost always relies on your opponent misplaying rather than you being able to use the advantage of the map.
I see. Because intuitively, I would think that it's good because you can hunker down on 2 points. but the points are very far away from where you spawn, and there's a lot of forest and stuff that might interfere with your um, shooting, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, like kind of like where your mouse is like between that bottom line of sight blocker and the forest. You think, oh, this is really good where you can kind of put Kislev in like a line to be defensive. But what you're not thinking about is the fact that your opponent can go through their forest and just sweep fully around. And because the reinforcements are so far away, it doesn't give you that much of a home field advantage if you're pushed back a bit, and you don't normally have the ability to get that chip damage as the enemy is approaching. That is extremely necessary for your units to get their value.
Lastly,
Another one that...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Good. I was going to say another one, and that is like a Ragnarok layer, where it can be okay for Kislev, but because you have trees and then a median slope, it makes it where your gun units are not going to perform well. So,
oh,
like,
the slope
really
between the center and the side points, you mean?
Exactly, yeah. So, like, if you're trying to leverage just a pure bow line, that map isn't terrible, but I think that a lot of Kislev's real advantages is within their gun units. So, where guns are going to be kind of bad, Kislev is going to have a disadvantage.
So we can also say that usually when dwarves are good, Kislev is good.
Yes. But
Except
Kislev
when they go against dwarves.
Yeah. Kislev has a bit, I feel like, of the mobility advantage. Like for example, Itza is a better map for dwarves than it is for Kislev, whereas something like Edge of the Darkwood
it needs a bit more space.
Exactly.
Let's end this with a replay review from a game that I played quite a long time ago against a clanmate. We both were learning new factions, so this is something more like a teaching tool. We've talked about this matchup before, I think. Kislev versus Khorne. Feel free to like critique what you see and what both a new Kislev player should watch out for and stuff like that. The idea I had in mind was that I was going to lose the infantry fight anyway. We've talked about the importance of Kossars and armored Kossars. I do not think that the shields matter versus Khorne, so that means no armor Kossar, and I don't really think the armor matters that much because everything on Khorne's infantry has either AP or anti-infantry.
Yep.
So that's why I didn't pick them. So a larger, cheaper front line I thought was warranted, while giving my guns the sort of the central role to play in this scenario. I do wanted something to kill warriors, so I brought the Sternguard's great weapons, as you've suggested. And let's see what happens. Are there any other considerations about this matchup you'd like to do? The only thing I would say is I hoped he didn't bring the skull cannons.
Yes.
Sorry.
Skull cannons are a absolute menace in this matchup. If you're in a tournament, the ROR is banned for the most part, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're in quick battle, you almost always need to have a little Grom in reserve, just in case your opponent brings that, because if you don't have anything to deal with the ROR skull cannon, it will pretty much solo half your army. Right off the get-go, too, I'd like to kind of point out that this is where the Ice Witch comes into why it's the meta lord. It's so cheap that you kind of need it if you want to go this wide with a Kislev build. Like, you only have 13 units. They're all pretty, like, mid-tier, and you don't have a super expensive lord. And that's kind of how Kislev functions, just by how expensive they are. And then one other thing to mention, this is just my pure setup. I personally would have put the Ice Guard behind that Streltsy unit that's there, just so that the Streltsy has a somewhat better line of sight when it's shooting. And spoiler for the game, you'll see in the game how some of them kind of bunch up a little bit and fire a bit unoptimally.
Yes, this is. I think this comes from dwarves, from me playing dwarves, where you want, like, some of your range units have no purpose attacking the front line; they are purely for backline defense.
Yep.
While here, this is a different scenario entirely. But that's correct. Probably I should have swapped these two places around.
Could still find use though, considering that you can use if like you use the ice guard as like a kite unit where you get initial volleys off and then just slowly push back with them behind your line.
So Korn is doing what Korn does, which is inhale glue and just charge. um, let's pick up the pace and see. If you have anything to point out, do feel free to tell me to pause. Obviously, my plan was to basically hunker down between points 2 and 3 and leverage my shooting advantage by building a big fire base and just move as needed between the 2 points. While my opponent will try to do like a big envelop with the carnivores in the forest.
Very standard, I feel like, approach with Kislev, and like it's good to point out actually. I think where your positioning is good is you have your guns so that they can kind of overlap and fire, but they're not so close to each other that a single unit can compromise two. That's a problem I often face. Is you got to get your gun box to be tight, but there has to be at least enough range between those units that they're not easily compromised by only one unit, or just like a single cav can just roll through 4 or 5 units. That's always the worst feeling, because that pretty much will just eliminate your chances of winning right there.
Would you recommend Kislev range units to be in the sort of like box formation like I do, or is it better to have them in a line?
Gun units, not armored corsairs, they're good to be completely spread out, but I feel like Streltsy are way better as like a little box, because they seem to turn a bit better when they're firing. They seem to shoot a little bit easier. There's just that few seconds where they don't have to fully reposition where they can shoot, so I definitely feel like your positioning is good. For like all your bows, I think you're good to be spread out. That way you kind of eliminate, you know, any spells or any like direct counters.
So this is the dwarf phase of the game for Kislev.
Yes.
Like this is exactly how a dwarf player would be handling it, just making sure that you have the best position, perhaps that you can get the cap point in the center so that you force the enemy to come to you. The differences will come slightly later, I guess. I should have perhaps... This is not great. Perhaps one of these 2 units should have been in the middle. This is where Ice Guard feel great.
Yes.
Ice Guard with swords being dived, diven. No, being attacked by
Doven.
Chaos War, Doven, by Warhounds.
Yeah, what you're doing is
the
pure
fantasy,
magic with
basically,
Kislev.
yeah.
You get dove on, your unit tanks it for a minute, you have your other unit shoot, and boom, you've immediately uptraded. And now they're in a scenario where, you know, the Forsaken, they really have, like, the envelopment is okay by Khorne, but they haven't done a good job really stressing your micro with all your units. So now you can get 3 units to blast this Forsaken, which will then cause it to retreat, which will then let your other 3 units continue blasting. It really is just a matter of, like, if you can slowly whittle away the different flanks that your opponent presents, that's where Kislev pulls a huge advantage. And then this is kind of what I would want to point out with positioning over, if you'd like to pause it. Your Streltsy and your Ice Guard are stacked right on top of each other.
Both here and here. Yeah, I just noticed that.
Yes.
You know.
And that, especially with the Streltsy in that position, are fine because they can get line of sight, but a lot of times you're going to prevent your units from getting their full range fire off by doing that.
Yes,
so
that's
just a small thing to point out.
Yeah, no, it's completely like it's half of what gun like Kislev needs to do. Like this is great because now the Griffin Legion can just bounce between all of these engagements and gets its massive charge bonus. And just I think that if it's microed correctly, that doesn't mean I did it, but if it is microed correctly, this unit of Griffin Legion can route basically. These are what, 3 Marauders? Yes.
Yeah.
All of these 3 can be completely destroyed by 1 Griffin Legion while the warriors tank.
Absolutely.
The Sternguard is destroying everything on the front line. I will take the liberty to just zoom into this because this is why we're here.
Oh yeah. That's also, I think, something you did really well this game is your target priority is always ensure that you're not necessarily shooting the closest thing, but you're shooting the most valuable thing, which in this scenario is these juggernauts.
This is magic. I think they
Yeah,
will.
you can just
Yeah, the Rio child with the
slowly
warriors.
getting blown up. It's satisfying. I will say, I think Kislev is one of the most satisfying factions to do a gun line with because it
Yes, I
feels
agree.
really good when it works.
It has all the tool it needs to make it look cool as well. But this is
And
like
this
a
is where
1700 gold unit which has lasted what 30 seconds.
Yeah, and this is where Buyer Blood is, I think, so useful. Is
Yes.
you just had Buyer Blood proc on the Streltsy. They're gonna have their 25 seconds to get their leadership kind of back to normal as it like stabilizes, and because they're not going to be under attack by the Juggernauts anymore, then they're going to be fine with their leadership. So you're really not in a scenario where, oh crap, my unit's routed, I have to reposition it. Oh, it's a ranged unit, so it can easily get picked. You really still have that like stability.
Let's keep going. I
Yeah.
am being triple capped, and the value is, I think, deceptively close together, because
Yeah.
in the moment I felt like the game was won already. Like Shaftesbury is a clanmate, he's a good player, but I think that this is what 5 minutes in, and most of the game is already decided.
Yep.
At least in my mind. I suicide my lord to Karnak because that's just what I have to do. It's part of the contract. But aside from that, this seems like a very dominating position for Kislev, because all of its breadwinners are still online, basically.
Yeah, that's the thing is like though they have some value, it's almost equivalent. Almost all their value is just chip damage, where you've taken a lot of the units themselves offline. So it's like maybe you've done equivalent damage, but you have way more units on the field.
The Griffin Legion is doing what I talked about before. It has just routed the Marauders dual axis, and now it has routed in 3 seconds another Marauder unit.
Yeah,
I
it's such a
still
good
am
unit.
making the mistake you told me about. These two units are now basically both stopped
Yep.
by one Forsaken.
Yep, and that's where they'll start to trade kind of low with Kislev is anytime that happens, then your Forsaken is just going to be Red City for them.
Also, another important thing with Bear Raiders is that if you zoom out, they waddle really weirdly. So that do think about. Look at this. Whatever. Uh, but yeah, basically this is just almost like the ideal Kislev scenario repeating itself over and over
Yep.
across the battlefield, I'd say.
Yep. Gorn needed to do a better job focusing their attack and timing it better into your line so that they could do a better rush down, so that your individual range pieces didn't have all that uptime firing. Because it's just let your warriors, they could just tank for days, which is exactly what you intended with it.
Yes. Warriors were there basically just to make sure my shooting did its job, and that's what I did. Oh yes,
That's so
die
satisfying.
savages. Oh, okay, sorry. This is might be Hawks of Mishka,
Yes.
which I think is really good versus Chaos. Obviously, this was not. Let's not think about this. Okay.
Just pan the camera, pan
Yes.
the camera.
Obviously,
No,
I
it's all
am, a tournament-winning player, so I use Hawks of Mishka on 2 units that are unbreakable. Also, please don't do this. Use it on units that can break. Don't be like me.
I'll point out that the way you're using their Snow Leopard too in combo with the bears is very smart.
Thank you. I need it.
It'll just get that route just a little bit quicker.
It causes fear, right? As well. Am I wrong?
Just the.
Oh, it
I
has
don't know if they
Guardian?
have-
I don't know this faction
Yes.
at all. Okay, that's cool.
Also, I'm not sure how it trades in terms of like HP, but I'm pretty sure for the cost, Snow Leopards do trade very well into Karnak.
The Sternguard pattern Lord Suicide has occurred, and now I can finally win the game. I can't win before suiciding my lord.
You have to make a sacrifice to
Yes.
Earth.
I think we can. Are there any like salient points you'd like to make before we wrap this up about the game and Kislev in general? Because I think basically this is the one thing that we've talked about, which is isolating enemy units and allowing your cav and your shooting to do the heavy lifting, just happening again and again and again.
Yep. Kislev has that really nice advantage. If you've won on the value early, it really lets you take like Cathay is one of those factions where you have to have an early lead advantage and you still might lose. Whereas Kislev, if you can get a really good early lead with your units because of all your mobility, because of how useful and tanky each of those units are, you can really capitalize that in the mid and late game. I think they're one of the better like mid to late game capping factions.
Oh, we haven't talked about Kislev cap weight, but I guess it is pretty good. You have no expendable units. Do units that are forgive the wording. Do units that have BoB that are inside BoB have reduced cap weight?
No, they do not. The only weird thing with Buyer Blood is you can get a terror route, and if you're being terror routed while Buyer Blood procs, it bugs out, and you have 25 seconds of terror. So it is a really that's a shitty bug that happens with Buyer Blood, but like cap weight wise, if it's procced, you still have that 25 seconds of full cap.
Okay, so that's actually pretty good then. Like, I mean the cap thing.
Yeah, the cap makes it where they're very solid at holding points, and like you know, even with your lord being dead, it didn't seem like a lot of your units are routing. So that's a great advantage of Kislev is their base leadership is quite high.
So, closing up this video, do you have any last words? Would you like to say any final words before we leave the people alone? The floor is yours.
Kislev.
Thank you.
No,
thank you very much.
No, just good faction. Appreciate the guide video. That was fun. Play Kislev if you want to feel, you know, the pure catharsis of being able to banish evil with your axe gun. And if that doesn't sound appealing to you, I don't know why
we
you
don't
made it this
want
far
you
in the
here.
video.
Yeah, we don't want you here anyway. Thanks very much, BoB, and we'll see all of you around in the channel soon. Bye, guys.
Take it easy, guys.